I'm Sarah, 63, a widow and a mom who thought she had seen it all. But when your own son and his wife decide to treat you like an outsider, especially after all you've done for them, it hits differently. Let's rewind a bit. My daughter-in-law Emily recently hosted a housewarming party at the new house. The kicker? I wasn't invited. You'd think a mother who bought the house for her son and his family would be at the top of the guest list, but nope. I found out about the party from my niece, who follows Emily on social media. She called me, upset, asking why I wasn't mentioned in any of the posts. At first I was confused. What party? What invitation? She sent me screenshots of Emily's posts. Pictures of decorations with captions like, "Happy home" and "1 week to go until the big celebration." The naive part of me thought maybe they'd just forgotten to send my invite. I told myself it was a mix-up and waited. Days passed. Nothing. No call, no text, no invite in the mail. The party was the next day and I still hadn't heard a word. I finally called my son. Let's call him Mike. I asked him about the party, trying to sound casual. He fumbled for words, mumbling something about Emily being busy. "I thought she invited you," he stammered. "It must have slipped her mind." "Yeah, right. It takes 10 seconds to send a text." I let it go, thinking he'd call back after talking to Emily. Spoiler, he didn't. The next day my phone buzzed with notifications. Pictures of the party flooded social media. Everyone was there. Friends, extended family, even Emily's co-workers. Everyone except me. It stung more than I cared to admit. I wasn't just excluded. I was erased. Now, comma. Let me give you some backstory. My late husband was my rock. When he passed away, he left me everything, our house, his savings, and enough insurance money to live comfortably. He specifically left nothing to Mike, not out of spite, but because he trusted me to take care of him if needed. And I did. Mike has always been a kind, well-meaning guy, but let's just say his financial decisions have been less than stellar. Over the years, my husband and I bailed him out of countless tight spots. When Mike married Emily, I was genuinely happy for him. She seemed sweet at first, if a little distant. I figured it was just nerves. Blending families can be awkward. But as time went on, her politeness started feeling more like a wall. She wasn't rude, but there was a coldness I couldn't ignore. And I tried to bridge the gap, inviting her to family dinners, offering to babysit, but she always had an excuse. Then came the accident. A drunk driver hit me head-on, leaving me with a jagged scar running down the side of my face. It wasn't something surgery could fix, and for a long time I struggled to look in the mirror. But over time I came to accept it. I told myself it didn't matter what the world thought. My worth wasn't tied to my appearance. Or so I thought. Emily's attitude shifted after the accident. She visited less, avoided eye contact, and always seemed to have a reason to keep me at arm's length. At first, I brushed it off as a coincidence. But when the housewarming snuff happened, everything clicked. You see, I bought that house for Mike and Emily. They'd been struggling for years, barely scraping by in a cramped apartment with their 2 kids. Mike was working 2 jobs, Emily was stretched thin, and their rent ate up most of their income. Meanwhile, the money my husband left me sat untouched in the bank. I figured, why not use it to give them a fresh start? The house wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect for a young family. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, and in a nice neighborhood. When I told them the news, Mike hugged me, tears streaming down his face. "Emily?" She smiled and said all the right things, but something about her reaction felt off. I ignored it, chalking it up to shock. They moved in right away, insisting they'd handle renovations themselves. I didn't mind. I was just happy they had a place to call home. But after that, Emily became even more distant. Anytime I wanted to visit, she'd come up with an excuse. Kids were sick, the house was messy, she was too tired. I gave her space, thinking she'd warm up eventually. Then came the party. Seeing those photos, the laughter, the toasts, the joy, while knowing I wasn't welcome, it broke something inside me. But I didn't confront them. Not yet. I waited. Sure enough, a few days later, Mike called, asking for help. They'd maxed out their credit cards on the party and were struggling to cover bills. I told him I'd think about it. After Mike's call, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, like it might suddenly give me answers. He wanted help. Seriously? They had a party in my house and left me out of it, but now they expected me to bail them out because they'd overspent? The nerve. I decided to let him stew for a bit. No response, no texts, radio silence. Let him feel the weight of his actions for once. A few days passed and Mike called again, this time with a nervous edge in his voice. "Hey Mom, are you okay? You haven't been answering my texts." He sounded concerned, but I could hear the desperation behind it. "I'm fine, Mike," I said evenly. "What do you need?" He chuckled nervously, like he thought the ice was broken. "Well, you know, things have been tight after the party and I was hoping you could help us out this month." There it was, no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd done. Just straight to the cash grab. I sighed, forcing myself to stay calm. "Mike, I don't have extra money lying around right now." Silence. Then, disbelief. "Wait, what do you mean? You've always helped us before." "Well, Mike, maybe you shouldn't throw parties you can't afford," I said, my voice sharper than I intended, "especially not in a house I bought for you without even inviting me." I could hear the gears turning in his head, trying to come up with a defense. "Mom, it wasn't like that," he said quickly. "It was just an oversight. Emily's been stressed, and we've had so much going on with the house and the kids." "An oversight?" I interrupted. "Mike, I saw the pictures. Everyone else managed to make the guest list, her coworkers, her family, your friends, but not me, the person who gave you that house." He stumbled through some excuse, but I wasn't buying it. "Look," I said, cutting him off, "I need some time to think about all this. Don't call me again unless you're ready to have a real conversation." A week later, Mike texted me saying he wanted to come over with the kids. I knew what he was doing. Bringing the grandkids was his way of softening me up, hoping I'd cave and write another check. Still, I agreed to the visit. If nothing else, I wanted answers. When they arrived, the kids ran off to the backyard to play while Mike and Emily sat across from me in the living room. Mike looked uncomfortable, but Emily sat there cool as ever, like she was doing me a favor by showing up. "So," I said, breaking the awkward silence, "are we going to talk about what happened, or are you just here for the money?" Emily stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you mean." I looked directly at her. "Why wasn't I invited to the housewarming party?" Mike shifted in his seat, clearly wanting to melt into the couch, but I wasn't letting him off the hook. "I want to hear it from you, Emily. No BS." She crossed her arms, her expression hard. "Fine. You want the truth? I didn't invite you because I didn't want you there." Her words hit like a slap. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low and steady. She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. "Your face," she said bluntly. "It's too much. I didn't want to scare the guests." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. My face, my scar, that was her reason? My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay composed. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You didn't want me at the party because you were embarrassed by how I looked." She shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "It wasn't personal. I just didn't want people asking questions." I felt something inside me snap. Years of patience, understanding, and forgiveness evaporated in an instant. "Emily," I said, my voice shaking with controlled anger, "that house you're living in, the one you threw your little party in, I paid for it. It's in my name. And if you don't want me in that house, then you don't need to live there either." Her eyes widened, but she quickly recovered, scoffing. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," I said, standing up. "You have 30 days to move out." Mike finally found his voice, stammering, "Mom, you can't do that. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said, glaring at him. "You both made it very clear that I'm not welcome in your lives, so why should you benefit from my generosity?" Emily jumped up, her voice rising. "You can't just throw us out. We have kids. What kind of person does that to their own family?" "The kind of person who won't be disrespected in her own house," I snapped back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I think we're done here." Emily stormed out, dragging the kids with her. Mike followed, shooting me a pleading look over his shoulder. I didn't budge that night. I sat alone in the quiet of my home, the weight of everything crashing down on me. It wasn't just Emily's cruel words. It was the realization that my own son had allowed her to treat me this way. How had it come to this? What kind of man had I raised that he would stand by and let his wife humiliate his mother? For the first time in years, I cried. Not just for myself, but for the family I thought I had. The betrayal cut deeper than any scar ever could. But as I wiped my tears, a sense of resolve washed over me. This wasn't the end. Not for me. I had spent too long being a doormat, too long letting people take advantage of my kindness. If they thought they could continue to walk all over me, they had another thing coming. The days after that confrontation were a blur. I thought about it constantly. The look on Emily's face when I told her to leave, the way Mike just sat there, caught between his mother and his wife. I kept waiting for him to call, to show up, to do something that would prove he wasn't completely under her thumb. But the phone stayed silent. Finally, about a week later, Mike called. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I know you're upset, but this is getting out of hand. Emily's sorry, she's been stressed, and she said things she didn't mean. Can we just put this behind us?" I clenched the phone, feeling my temper rise. "Oh, so now she didn't mean it?" I said, my voice sharp. Because she seemed pretty clear when she told me I wasn't welcome at the party because of my face. He hesitated, fumbling for words. "She's just not good at expressing herself. You know how she gets." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mike, do you hear yourself? You're making excuses for her. She insulted me, your mother in a house I gave you, and you think I'm just supposed to let that slide? She's apologized," he shot back, his tone defensive. "What more do you want?" "I want respect, Mike. I want to know that my own son values me enough to stand up for me, but instead, you're sitting there defending the woman who's been treating me like garbage for years." There was a long silence. Then softly he said, "Mom, I don't want to lose you." His words caught me off guard. For a brief moment, I felt the anger melt away, replaced by a deep sadness. "You already have," I said quietly. "Not because of what Emily did, but because you let her. You've chosen her over me at every turn, Mike, and now you're reaping the consequences." I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. This wasn't how I wanted things to go, but I couldn't keep bending over backward for people who wouldn't even meet me halfway. A few days later, they showed up at my door. Emily had tears in her eyes, holding one of the kids on her hip like a shield. Mike stood behind her, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Sarah," Emily began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for what I said. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, can we talk about this?" I stared at her, unimpressed. "You didn't mean to hurt me? You called me an embarrassment, Emily. That's not something you say by accident." "I was stressed," she cried. "The party was a lot, and I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, we don't have anywhere else to go. Don't punish the kids for my mistake." Her words might have carried more weight if she hadn't spent years keeping me at arm's length. I looked at Mike, searching his face for any sign of the son I used to know. He just stared at the floor. "I don't think so," I said firmly. "You had your chance to treat me with respect, and you blew it. My decision stands." Emily's tears turned to anger in an instant. "You can't just throw us out. We're family." "Family?" I snapped. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm nothing more than a wallet to you." She glared at me, her true colors showing. "You're being unreasonable. You can't just take back the house." I folded my arms, my voice calm but icy. "The deed is still in my name, Emily. Legally, it's mine, and I'm well within my rights to ask you to leave." She turned to Mike, desperate. "Say something. You can't let her do this." But Mike just stood there, his face pale. "Mom, please," he said softly. "Let's work this out." "There's nothing to work out," I said, my tone final. "You have 30 days. After that, I'll involve the authorities." Emily stormed out, dragging the kids with her. Mike hesitated, looking back at me one last time before following her. The door slammed and the house fell silent. The next few weeks were tense. I sent an official eviction notice through my lawyer, making it clear that I wasn't bluffing. Mike called several times, pleading with me to reconsider, but I held firm. "You're not going to guilt me into changing my mind, Mike," I told him. "This is what happens when you let someone treat me like dirt in my own house." At one point, Emily even tried to play dirty, threatening to cut me off from the grandchildren. "You'll never see them again if you do this," she hissed during one heated phone call. "Do what you have to do," I said calmly. "But I'm not going to let you manipulate me." True to form, she didn't believe I'd follow through. When the 30 days passed and they still hadn't moved out, I called the police. I reported them as squatters, and when that didn't light a fire under them, I made a public post on social media explaining the situation in detail. That did the trick. Emily's pride couldn't handle the idea of people knowing she was living rent-free in her mother-in-law's house. They packed up and left within a week, moving back to their old, overpriced apartment. One day, I received a letter from their oldest child. The handwriting was shaky, clearly dictated by Emily. It asked why I'd kicked them out and begged me to give the house back. My heart broke a little, knowing the kids were caught in the middle of all this. But I couldn't let that guilt sway me. I hadn't started this mess, I was just finishing it. Some nights, I wonder if I went too far. But then I remember the look on Emily's face when she told me I wasn't good enough to be at her party. The pain of that moment reminds me that respect isn't negotiable. I gave them everything, and they threw it back in my face. This was the line in the sand. After they moved out, the house felt quieter than ever. It wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet I'd hoped for. It was heavy, filled with echoes of what should have been. I tried not to think about the grandkids, how they were adjusting to being back in their cramped apartment, or if they even understood why everything had changed so suddenly. But I had to remind myself, this wasn't my doing. I didn't create this mess. Emily had built this bridge and Mike had let her burn it down. A few days after they left, I got another call from Mike. This time he sounded defeated. "Mom, I know we've done wrong," he started, his voice heavy. "But is there really no way to fix this?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Mike, I gave you every opportunity to do the right thing. You had years to stand up for me, to show me even a shred of respect, but you didn't. And then your wife had the audacity to insult me in a house I bought for you. Tell me, why would I want to fix this?" He sighed deeply. "I didn't know she was going to say those things. If I'd known, I would have stopped her." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't know because you never tried to understand how she treats me." "You've always looked the other way, Mike, and I've let it slide for too long." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then he said softly, "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." His apology caught me off guard, but I couldn't let myself fall into old habits. "I appreciate that, Mike," I said carefully. "But sorry doesn't fix the damage. You let her disrespect me, and you've been complicit in it by staying silent. I can't just forget that." He didn't argue. Maybe he knew there was no point. Instead, he asked, "Do you hate me?" I closed my eyes, his question piercing deeper than I expected. "No, Mike, I could never hate you. You're my son, but I don't like who you've become, and I don't like the way you've let your wife treat me." For weeks after that conversation, I didn't hear from Mike or Emily. The silence should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd feel a pang of hope that it was him calling to try again. But it never was. Instead, I threw myself into my work at the library and my community service projects. Staying busy kept my mind from wandering too much, though there were moments when the loneliness crept in. I'd sit at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from me and wonder if I'd made the right choice. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Mike was standing there with his youngest, a little boy with big brown eyes that reminded me so much of my late husband. "Mom," Mike said, his voice low, "can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face him. But then I looked down at my grandson, clutching a toy truck in his tiny hands, and my heart softened. "Come in." We sat in the living room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Mike started talking, his words tumbling out in a rush. He told me how hard things had been since they'd moved back to the apartment, how Emily was furious with him for not convincing me to change my mind, how the kids were struggling with the transition. "I'm not telling you this to guilt you, Mom," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what to do anymore." For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the boy I raised, the one who used to come to me when he didn't know how to fix something. "Mike," I said gently, "you need to start taking responsibility for your life, for your family. You've spent so long letting Emily call the shots, but look where it's gotten you." He nodded, his eyes welling up. "I know. I just don't know how to stand up to her." "You have to decide what kind of man you want to be," I said. "A husband who enables his wife's worst behavior? Or a father who teaches his kids what it means to be kind and respectful?" His head dropped into his hands, and for a moment he was silent. Then he looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "I want to be better, Mom. I really do." That night, we talked for hours. For the first time, Mike opened up about his struggles, his insecurities, his fear of confrontation, and the pressure he felt to provide for his family. It didn't excuse his actions, but it helped me understand him in a way I hadn't before. Before he left, I told him, "Mike, I love you, I always will, but love doesn't mean I'll let you or anyone else walk all over me. Respect is a two-way street, and if you want me in your life, you have to meet me halfway." "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you, Mom." As he walked out the door holding his son's hand, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of our relationship. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. Miley's message lingered in my mind longer than I'd like to admit. I knew she blamed me for everything, and in her eyes, I was the villain. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't care. I wasn't responsible for her choices, or for Mike's. I'd spent years trying to make things work, bending over backward to keep the peace, and all it ever did was teach them to take me for granted. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Mike and I exchanged a few polite texts, mostly about the grandchildren. It wasn't the warm, easy relationship I wished we had, but it was a start. I didn't hear much from Emily, which was a blessing in disguise. I could only assume she was still furious, but that wasn't my problem. I had done what I needed to do to protect myself, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. One Saturday morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Mike. It showed my two grandkids playing with a puzzle on the floor of their tiny apartment. The caption read, "They miss you, Mom. Can we visit soon?" I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. I missed them too, more than I could put into words. But I also knew I couldn't go back to the way things were. If Mike wanted me in their lives, it had to be on different terms. Terms where respect and boundaries weren't optional. I texted back, "You're welcome to visit, but Emily and I need to have a real conversation first. No pretending, no excuses. I deserve that much." His response came quickly. "I understand. I'll talk to her." The day they came over, I was nervous. I hadn't seen Emily since the eviction notice, and I didn't know how she'd act. When they arrived, the kids ran to hug me, their laughter filling the house with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. Mike hung back, looking unsure, while Emily stood by the door, her face unreadable. I kneeled down to greet the kids, holding them tightly before sending them off to play in the backyard. Then I turned to Emily, gesturing for her to sit. For a while, we sat in silence, the tension so thick it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Finally, she broke it. "I know you hate me," she said, her voice low. "I don't hate you," I said calmly, "but I don't trust you. And after the way you've treated me, can you really blame me?" She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I didn't mean to make things so bad. She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't grow up with people like you. My parents weren't generous. They didn't give us anything without making us feel like we owed them for it." Her admission surprised me. It wasn't an apology, but it was the most vulnerable thing I'd ever heard her say. "Emily," I said gently, "I never gave you that house to hold it over your head. I did it because I loved my son and wanted to help his family. But love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect, and that's what you've been doing. Disrespecting me, my scar, my life, everything." She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I thought if I kept you at a distance, it would make things easier." "Easier for who?" I asked pointedly. She didn't have an answer. That conversation was the turning point. Emily didn't apologize outright, not in the way I'd hoped, but there was a shift in her. She seemed smaller, more humble. Mike, to his credit, stepped in when she started making excuses, holding her accountable in a way I hadn't seen before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the time they left that afternoon, I felt lighter. The anger I'd been carrying for so long was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope that things might actually get better, not just for me, but for all of us. In the months that followed, Mike started making an effort to rebuild our relationship. He called me more often, sometimes just to check in, and brought the kids over regularly. Emily was still guarded, but she was civil, and I took that as a win. I didn't push for more. If she wanted to make amends, it had to be on her own terms. One evening, Mike called me out of the blue. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything," he said, "and I just wanted to thank you for standing up to us, for not letting us take advantage of you." I was stunned. "What brought this on?" I asked Dot. He laughed softly. "I've been looking at how things were before, and I realized how unfair we were to you. You deserved better, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Thank you, Mike. That means more than you know. It's been a year now since that fateful eviction. Things aren't perfect, but they're better. Mike and I are slowly rebuilding our bond, and even Emily seems to be making an effort. The kids still light up my life every time they visit, and I cherish those moments more than ever. Dot. As for me, I've learned a valuable lesson. Respect starts with how you allow others to treat you. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself, especially when it's your own family, but it's necessary, because at the end of the day, you can't pour from an empty cup. I've stopped blaming myself for what happened. I didn't fail as a mother. I didn't fail as a person. I did what I had to do to protect my dignity, and for that, I'll never apologize. Dot. So, here I am, scarred but unbroken, living life on my own terms. And for the first time in years, I can finally say I'm at peace. Story 2. It's time to raise a chair. In our lounge today, we have another fascinating story for you. Mr. Perfect checked all the boxes just when you thought you had everything worked out. A jealous half-sister who wants the stuff all to herself is thrown at you by life. In the flight lounge today, sometimes facing the turmoil head-on is the only way to proceed. Dot. My sister attempted to ruin my life by stealing my fiancé. I therefore tell her new spouse about her cheating. When my 25-year-old fiancé Tyler proposed to me, a 23-year-old woman, she got divorced. After years of battling with my family dynamics and guys who took and never gave, I believed I had finally found peace. I met this amazing, seemingly ideal guy. Dot. The disaster I grew up in was the complete opposite of Tyler. He was trustworthy, grounded, and the type of person who gave me a sense of security. And it could have been my first error, assuming that the security would endure. Tyler was more than simply my companion. The only person I knew who could relate to me was him. He was aware of my dad's adultery and the complex circumstances in my family. Dot. That resulted in the birth of my half-sister Layla and my mother's decision to leave. Even though it meant severing our family and taking on a lot on her own, she walked away strong, taking half of everything he had achieved. For that, I held her in high regard. Therefore, it's possible that I saw in Tyler the possibility of creating a family without any flaws in its base, for which I had always yearned. Tyler put significantly more effort into our relationship after we became engaged. He would organize our weekends together, surprise me with tiny presents, and participate in all wedding-related decisions, no matter how minor. My parents believed he was the one for me. My life was ruined by Layla, the ideal younger sister I was forced to have after the divorce. I was 9 years old when I first met her, and I could already sense her presence looming over every aspect of my existence. Dot. I'm not sure why she detested me or believed I was a rival. My dad's golden kid, Layla, appeared to thrive on stealing things that weren't really hers. My possessions, my friends, my crushes, and even the little tidbits of family time I would receive. She didn't stop. It was more than simply little matters, as you can see. Eventually, I would find out that my mom was only married by my dad because she was expecting me. Dot. According to my aunt, he wasn't prepared to settle. As a child, Layla had the ability to enchant everyone. She didn't find it difficult. She was gregarious and adorable. I was the silent one, though. My dad felt compelled to maintain the error. Unlike her, I wasn't humorous, boisterous, or laid back. She dedicated her entire life to gaining my father's approval. Dot. It didn't exactly work out the first time she attempted it with my mom. However, everyone in the room would give me a severe, halting, envious look if I tried to voice even the slightest grievance since, aside from my mother, she had everyone else so tightly tethered to her. In high school, Layla truly harmed me for the first time. I had a crush on someone, but I didn't date much at the time. I once told Layla about this guy, believing she would keep it to herself, and he was sort of amusing in a goofy manner. Furthermore, I never would have imagined that she would choose someone like him. However, I was mistaken. She said she would use a positive term. I was gullible. The next thing I know, she invited him to accompany me to a school dance. She said that she couldn't just date him and be done, and that they eventually started dating. At home, she made sure to show it out in my face the whole time. She claimed to be friends with my parents. She was so happy to get him out from beneath me, and I can still remember it. I knew better than to put my confidence in her by my senior year. Perhaps it's depressing, but I just stopped talking. I knew she would somehow wreck it, so I gave up attempting to hide things from her. I was always the one who had to give an explanation at my dad's place. Layla, however, survived on her charm. I believed I had left her shadow behind when I eventually departed for college. I made a new beginning, hours and miles away from the craziness of my family. My mom and her new family took me in. It was pleasant to be there, and she seemed pleased to have me there. However, it wasn't that easy. Since my dad provided half of my money, and I knew I had to maintain appearances, I divided my time between the two of us, returning to his house for vacations, out of mind and out of sight. I believed it to be the rule. I therefore continued to be on his radar. But for the first time, I felt independent, free to choose my own companions and pursue my own interests. I wasn't afraid that Lila would have an impact on me. I met Tyler at that point. He was not fooled by the pretenses of others. He was sincere and truthful, through the gibberish, and I soon had the impression that I had at last discovered someone I could rely on. I was wise enough to keep Layla away from him right away. Every time I brought him up, her witch radar was on, and I could see the wheels spinning. "How about you invite him over?" she would say, as if she was being helpful to me. However, I wasn't a moron. I separated them as much as possible, and it worked for a time. Together we enjoyed 2 amazing years. Finally, he made a proposal. It seemed unreal, as if I had created our own little haven of joy that Layla was unable to access. She was ecstatic for us though, or so she said. When I was preoccupied with work, she volunteered to show Tyler around and insisted on assisting with wedding preparations. At first, I disregarded it. Tyler wasn't just a naive high school kid after all. However, every time I saw her text him or unintentionally run into us at the home, that uneasy feeling in my gut got worse. Then the SMS message arrived. While Tyler and a few friends were celebrating your engagement at the pub, Layla sent me a notice while I was working late. She included a photo of Tyler holding a drink while he laughed. I ignored the fact that I ought to have been invited. I was too exhausted to give it any thought. Or perhaps I simply didn't want to see the warning flags. However, everything fell apart one day. Tyler's phone was on the counter in the kitchen. He informed me he was going to his office, so I was about to call them. However, a notice appeared. "Are you coming over after, Layla?" My heart fell. I gazed at the screen while the words, each as sharp as a dagger, blurred. I had faith in him. I had faith in her. However, a black and white was present. It wasn't until I picked up the phone to check his messages that I realized I was trembling. And what I discovered hit me like a kick to the stomach. They had been sending texts for months. They exchanged suggestions to get together for drinks and laughs, which seemed harmless enough. But according to what I read, Layla had made advances on him while manipulating our family group conversations to make me seem cruel or paranoid. Tyler hadn't just followed orders. He had met her for catch-ups, given her encouragement, and complimented her. He had complimented her in ways that were, at best, improper, and she had given him images for fun. He said I wouldn't miss it, in response to her suggestion that they meet. His message to her was the last straw. "I'll speak with her shortly, I swear." Every warning sign I had disregarded, every time I convinced myself I was dreaming, had been played to me. It had been authentic, all of it. Layla was doing this after only a little more than a year of marriage. Even after finding a spouse, she continued to act like this jerk. I used my phone to record a video of every message, taking deep breaths to avoid yelling. Imagine how he dashed back inside the home, you guys. Fortunately, a few minutes later, I had returned his phone to the counter like a crazy person trying to find it. I would have been rolling around on the ground laughing if I wasn't so upset. Yes, exactly. I acted as though nothing had altered. I prepared dinner. As he told me about his exhausting workday, I nodded and laughed at his jokes. I made myself act normal even though every second felt like a betrayal. I had to do my part flawlessly, at least until I learned more. I engaged a private investigator throughout the course of the following several days. This marked a sea change. Yes, it is dramatic. But keep in mind that we were dealing with Layla. I wanted proof. I needed to be unquestionable. Knowing that they were unaware that I was onto them gave me a sick feeling of joy. I had the proof, pictures, receipts, and even the dates they had met at her place in less than 2 weeks. The worst thing? The day following our engagement party, Tyler had gone to her apartment, leaving me alone at home while he and my half-sister celebrated. I felt as though I had been crushed to a powder. I was unable to even bring myself to ask my father for help. Compared to my mother, he was physically closer to me. I wouldn't even get the help I so desperately needed. I was forced to phone and tell my mom's step-siblings instead. They were furious as soon as they learned, even though we had always been close. We should corner her and beat her up. One of them even proposed. I had heard a tale about a lady who strangled her husband's affair partner by attacking her, but that card has always been a wild card. I quickly discarded the notion since I didn't want my face to appear in a mugshot. Layla was unbelievable to them. I would be betrayed by someone I grew up with. They encouraged me to plot my retaliation. I had always considered myself to be calm, forgiving, and if possible, conflict-averse. However, all of the anger and suffering grew into something more sinister at that very time. Everyone Nate tricked would be there to see my plan to expose them both in the most visible manner imaginable. It was more than just revealing their treachery. It was about ensuring that everyone recognized them for who they truly were and destroying the warped allegiance they had been showing me for years. I started by contacting Layla, doing my part expertly. Since she was so good at sarcasm, I informed her that I wanted her assistance in organizing a surprise vacation for Tyler. I proposed that we discuss ideas over lunch. The bait, hook, line, and sinker were all taken by her. I'm really happy to be around Tyler. What else might explain her excitement? Oh my goodness, though. I had a surprise for her at lunch. I placed it on the deck. While rambling about the phony enthusiasm for Tyler, I pretended to be the devoted fiancé. How delighted I was at the wedding. As I sobbed, I noticed that Layla was faking a grin on her face. It hurts to see her pretend joy since it was giving. She was unable to control her jealousy. No, actually, she was a wicked girl. Then I let the bait go. I informed her that I had prepared a unique event that would be attended by all members of the family at an impending get-together. My mother, my father, his spouse, and all of our siblings, Layla's husband Tom, and Tyler's parents. Although I don't know a lot about the connection, I don't give a damn. When Layla understood how big of an event it was going to be, a glint came to her eye, and her face brightened up. However, she was unaware that she would soon be at the center of the storm. In the meantime, I had been getting ready my armament, which included a flash drive with the presentation together with the investigators' receipts, screenshots, and pictures. I had gathered everything I would need to ruin Layla's reputation as a decent girl in public. The idea was to just expose them both in front of her husband and our entire family on a large screen that was meant to display images of Tyler and myself. When their filthy laundry was displayed for everyone to see, I wanted them both to be writhing. On the day of the family get-together, I showed there and spoke. I received a lot of praise that day. I have seen firsthand how being loud may sometimes get you where you want to go. Layla played the role of the phony younger sister, while Tyler played the ideal fiancé. After everyone was assembled, her fake smile simply strengthened my determination. I discreetly excused myself, got the flash drive, and handed it to my brother, the designated media person, when he returned to the room. I felt like everyone was watching me, but my eyes were fixed on Layla and Tyler. I let the tension to build until there was no sound in the room. Everyone anticipated seeing adorable photos of Tyler and me. I want to tell everyone about something really significant. I started, then went up to start the video. As soon as the television came on, Let's face went white. Tyler grinned as he glanced up. Lost. I turned to Lila and Tyler, speaking in a steady, composed tone. The fact that you two have been seeing one another behind my back has long been known to me. I held Tyler's stare as I gazed directly at him. The late-night meetings at her flat, the texts and the dates, everything. The room fell quiet. When they stood together, my dad's wife gasped and clutched her chest. I had never seen my father's face that crimson. However, I was unable to determine if it was aimed at me or them. Tyler stammered out something, but I shot him a glare that cut him off. I opened the folder and started working immediately. I went through the slides one by one. Photos of them together, receipts from all the covert dinners they believed they'd gotten away with, and texts detailing their shady interactions. At their funeral, it was similar to giving away party goodies. The room burst, but Layla's mother appeared to be processing all she was seeing and could have wanted to pass out or even have a stroke. Tyler's parents appeared to have had their hearts torn out, despite the fact that they had always treated me like family. Even though my dad made an effort to calm everyone down, I wasn't done. I turned to face him, my voice cool and firm. I pointed to the chaos on the television and remarked, "This is what happens when you let someone like Layla run wild," rewarding her for all the things she manages to get away with. I looked at his wife. "For years you have made her possible." I dismissed my grievances as envy. Layla was free to do as she pleased, but Tyler was fumbling and apologizing incoherently. His parents gave him a disdainful look. Meanwhile, Layla sat looking pale and wide-eyed. Tears began to fall. She was disregarded each time she tried to defend herself. Her tears only became more intense as she came to understand the full ramifications of her behavior and what it meant to be on the wrong side of people. I looked straight at Tyler as I said my final sentence. "I cherished you. You tossed everything away when I believed you were the one, for a person who only desires things that are not hers." I then looked at Layla. "Now that everyone, especially your spouse, has seen you for who you truly are, I hope it was worth it." In utter confusion, I collected my belongings and attempted to exit the room. Tyler's parents, enraged at his treachery, stopped him as he attempted to follow. Layla moved in my direction. She desired to fight me. Before she could, I could see it in her eyes. Her spouse was already pursuing her. This is how my escape went well. In front of everyone, I could hear her husband yelling at her, demanding answers and ripping into her. Even though I knew the UN had destroyed their life, I left with my dignity intact. The consequences? It was, in fact, excellent. Informed their families. For the moment, he was almost not disowned. I was furious that he had deceived them just as much as I had. After that, his mother contacted and begged me to take him back, claiming that Tyler had nowhere to go. As if to convince me otherwise, she even gave me specifics of their family's problems. Layla, I ignored her. Her life became the catastrophe she had deserved. Her spouse filed for divorce. Despite the fact that she no longer supported her boys, her mother clearly supported her, and at least the group of friends we had in common who believed she was more attractive. Now, the truth, and turned away from her. She was left to deal with the fallout after losing everyone's respect. For the first time in her life, she was truly left alone. My dad wasn't exempt either, according to my mom and her relatives. They had viewed the family group chat's photos. I had to give the presentation and accused him of ignoring Layla's worst conduct. Backlash and the loss of the devotion he had taken for granted replaced his once perfect family. The ironic thing is that he offered me a new automobile, an improved model of the one he had given Layla years prior, the one I had desired, as an act of contrition. But she persuaded him to give it to her instead. It's still in my name, even though I refused it. He can still and regrets not reaching out to the one sane child he has left, but perhaps I will change my mind later. He was blocked by me. Give him a stern lesson. I don't give a damn about his wife's situation. I didn't inquire about her. I actually made sure I didn't hear anything about her. I had no interest. Me, I went on. Since I was 9 years old, I've gone through a lot. Therefore, I'm not completely recovered. However, I am surrounded by individuals who genuinely love and respect me, and I am unquestionably stronger. I relocated permanently to my mother's home. Knowing that they ultimately received precisely what they were due makes me look back on it all with satisfaction. Being harmed by a loved one is one thing, but losing a close friend and family member who you considered a reliable life partner is quite another. In this sense, you were double-crossed. That hurts on a new level. Tyler and Layla were unaware of what had happened. It must have been difficult, but you seem to have recovered your voice in a really strong way. I hope it marked a sea change for your family as well, particularly for those who were never completely aware of what Layla was doing in the background. How do you interpret this? Please share your opinions in the comments section below. And thanks for coming to the lounge with us today. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. Till the next occasion. Additionally, kindly return your chair to its original location. Story 3. It's time to raise a chair. In the oral lounge today, we have another fantastic anecdote for you. Blending families is sometimes compared as attempting to combine water and oil. They simply don't seem to mix together today, no matter how hard you stir. The island does too. Tough love is a great way to develop character. Let's get started. My daughter was humiliated by my stepson. I evicted him from the house and stopped paying for his college education. I'm reporting this strange situation here in hopes of receiving some insight or guidance. My wife and I are frequently caught between my stepson and my daughter, who just cannot stand one another. This argument is undoubtedly hurting our marriage. The mail was where I battled. I quote, "We've been married for 4 years to my second wife, Kira, a 46-year-old woman. I have a 15-year-old daughter named Ellie, and she has a 20-year-old son named Jill from her former marriage. Ellie's mother and my first wife died in an accident when Ellie was 7 years old. I've been caring for her as a single mom ever since. I then got to know Kira a few years later. She had been separated for some time. We clicked right away and went out. We frequently believed that we could sense one another's loneliness, but nobody had told me how challenging it might be to house 2 very different children together. Yes, we were aware that it would be difficult, but we didn't anticipate it to be this unsightly. It seemed nice from the outside when we first met one another's kids. Having Kira in our lives made her joyful. She embraced Kira wholeheartedly. Girls, particularly those in their preteen years, need women in their life. Kira showed Ellie the same affection, but for Jill, it wasn't the same. Since my daughter was still in her preteen years and was extremely receptive to dating another lady, I won't be comparing them. However, Jill, like many teenagers, was in the prime of her adolescence. What was going on in his mother's life didn't bother him. He was there only to be there. Although Tara blamed Jill's father for his actions, she reassured me that he was a good boy who would change his ways. He moved in with us after we were married. Jill didn't mind at all. They shared a little apartment, but now he has a room of his own in my roomy 4-bedroom home. Ellie was fine, though I won't say she was overjoyed to have an older brother. And if the effort had come from both sides, perhaps they would have gotten along nicely. It was a comfort that they first appeared uninterested in one another. I reasoned that it was simpler to control indifference than outright animosity. But over time I saw Joe acting nefariously toward Ellie. He would make subtle barbs at her fashion taste and passive-aggressive remarks. Although she couldn't fight Joe, Ellie would strike back. In most cases, she would simply accept it, her face lowering a bit more every day. I initially dismissed it as sibling rivalry, Karen, but we would step in when we saw that Ellie was unable to defend herself against him. But Jill became resentful of us because of it. They were teens after all. However, I believed that Jill could be struggling to fit in with a new family. When I married his mother, he was 16 years old. Since he wasn't the type of older brother Ellie had anticipated, I also thought she could be reserved and quiet around him. Perhaps they were just adjusting emotionally to each other. But Ellie stopped taking Jill's BS when she became a teenager and would defend themselves. They started fighting like cats and dogs as a result. The open enmity we feared. They would simply quarrel about everything. Karen and I made an effort to diffuse the situation, but juggling those 2 children is quite draining. I believed that things would improve as soon as Jill moved away for college. To my dismay, Jill did not enroll in a dorm and instead picked a college that was a long way from our home. I recommended that he get a part-time work because she would be spending the remaining evenings and weekends alone after graduation. Jill, however, was too indolent to work. The animosity between them persisted because he was too busy doing nothing. When Jill made a nasty remark about Ellie's acquaintance who came to her house a year ago, the water level crossed. She was embarrassed. Jill refused to apologize despite Ellie's insistence. Rather, he made fun of Ellie's weight, which caused a huge argument between them. When Kira arrived home, she attempted to mediate and get Jill to apologize, but the evil boy bounded out. Kira expressed regret to her buddy and Ellie, but nobody of them found that sufficient. Tara informed me what had transpired when I got home and recommended that we have a family session or take him to therapy. He ain't insane, Jill said, rejecting therapy. Kira stopped his pocket money and grounded him. He was so compelled to accompany us. Furthermore, treatment won't be helpful unless you desire to help yourself. Since my daughter was growing estranged from Kira due to her son, the family counseling strengthened the relationship between Karen and Ellie. Over the years, similar incidents continued to occur. Karen and I kept working to close the gap between our kids, but it was all in vain. We believe that until one of them moves out, things will remain this way. I thus anticipated that Jill would move out for college, but he did not. When my stepson hits 18, I wouldn't be the type of man to make him start working. We now hope he finishes college, finds employment, and moves out. However, Jill went too far last week, which caused me to second-guess my choice to let him in my daughter's life. Thus, Ellie and Jill attend the same tennis school. That's how their match brought Kira and me together. Although Jill is superior to Ellie, both are currently very good in their respective leagues. Ellie's time at the tennis academy was ruined by Jill. Regarding her, he has been circulating baseless stories. The final one went too far, while the others were innocuous. Ellie locked herself in a room after returning from a rehearsal in tears. She wouldn't speak to any of us. She even skipped school, which is really unusual for her. Jill pretended to be arrogant when we questioned him about it because he was also at the practice. Too arrogant. It didn't appeal to me. I had a nagging suspicion that something was wrong. In order to give her the time and space she needed to deal with her belongings, I departed for work. I examined her out the window when I returned in the evening. Ellie was still writing something on her notepad in her room. She wouldn't talk to any of us or eat supper with us. Despite our deep worry for her, Kira and I gave her some space. Since Ellie was acting in this way after returning from her tennis session, Kira questioned Jill at the meal if she knew anything about her predicament. Riley disputed it, yes. I realized he had something to do with whatever was hurting her when I noticed him grinning across the table. I questioned you sharply. What's going on? Don't you know something about it? You had best not be involved. Oh, it isn't anything, just a little harmless fun. As he stated this, his tone was brimming with conceit. It infuriated me. He was attempting to convey that Ellie was simply exaggerating. Kira stepped right in and inquired, "What kind of fun?" Joe leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "It's only a rumor, not a huge deal." Kira nearly barged in on him, demanding the specifics. He was embarrassed and defensive. "What's the matter with you? Why do you all overreact every time? Why she's acting out so much is beyond me. Why don't we ask this? Your snowflake child?" I stepped in and asked him to control his tone and words. Halfway through, he sprang up from the table and raced out of the home. I went to knock on his door after leaving the dinner table. She opened it since she most likely heard everything. On the sofa, she was pouting. I added, "Please tell me exactly what happened, but I know it has something to do with Jill." It was as though she wished to vanish. She broke down in tears as her cheeks flushed with shame. "What's wrong?" Hera questioned, holding her. I was attempting to flirt with my coach to obtain extra playing after Jill created a word at tennis school that I had a crush on him, Ellie recounted after having a breakdown. I'm about a foot shorter than the coach, who is around 6'4". People began making jokes about it. It can feel ashamed of flirting with a taller and older man. I avoid making out with him. The other females talk back, but I don't. Ellie was a quiet, reserved girl who put a lot of effort into everything she did. Joe had publicly humiliated her by dragging her into a situation that she had never been interested in. The room's air grew chilly. I wanted to hold her in my arms and shield her from the harsh outside world because I felt so sad for her. We were unaware that Joe was listening in on this. All of this occurred while we were still attempting to comprehend what had transpired and how to respond to it. Jill showed up laughing cruelly. Kira sprang to her feet and yelled at him, "S not amusing. Why would you do that?" Still grinning and giggling, Jill said, "It's just a joke. Now, everyone is discussing it. It's funny." My chances of thrashing in black and blue had increased by 1 inch. I yelled at him, "Leave this place immediately. You went too far. The repercussions will be dealt with by you." I shouted at him to go as he attempted to speak. Then I asked Kira to stop bothering us, and she did. I gave Ellie a hug and expressed my regret for everything she had to endure as a result of my choice to have that guy in our life. She realized that he was solely to blame. I felt terrible for subjecting her to this. Having such a devoted daughter is such a blessing. How many teens do you see that don't hold their parents accountable for the misdeeds of their stepbrothers and sisters? I promised to make things right for her and forced her to eat. I returned to my room and spoke with Kira about the matter. She was worried about Ellie's health as well. We made the decision to speak with Jill seriously. This was no longer merely a small argument between siblings. I wasn't going to put up with this bullying. Kira sat him down the following day and told him, "You did, buddy. Ellie was mean. It's not amusing. You should express regret and explain that the rumor was something you circulated for amusement. Additionally, make sure that doesn't happen again." He gave me the expression that I was being absurd and making his mother teach him. He shouted, "I'm not saying I'm sorry for a joke. It's her fault if she can't handle it. Nothing is being cleared off by me." My gut twisted in a knot of frustration. This was more than simply adolescent obstinacy. This was evil. Ever since I married his mother, I had been providing for him financially, covering everything, including his tennis lessons and college tuition. He had been like a son to me. But here he was, denying that he had caused such severe harm to someone. I warned him that there would be repercussions if he didn't apologize. He obviously didn't take me seriously since he snorted, such as, "Do you intend to ground me?" "I'll stop paying your college tuition," I said. He was interested in that. "You can't do that," he continued, his grin fading. Mom would not allow it. Kira is also taken aback by what I said. This was unexpected to her. However, you agreed and said that your joke had gone too far. If you don't want to face the repercussions, you must put things right. However, you declined. He bounded from the house, shut the door after him. I wasn't intimidating him. Despite what Karen believed, she asked me after he left, "You didn't mean to cut him off for yourself, did you?" "Yes," I replied. "If he doesn't change his mind, I'll stop paying for his college education." She became concerned about his future and stated that we couldn't risk it because it was a severe penalty. Then, I argued, he need to accept responsibility and offer an apology. She fell silent. She is aware that Jill is too arrogant to correct the situation. Although I didn't tell her, I think it's a waste of money to pay for college. He really doesn't take his academics seriously. In order to avoid being asked to work, he attended college simply to waste his time. It took him 2 years to complete his first year of college and 4 years to complete high school. What else can I say? Unfortunately, my options are restricted to asking for rent or stopping his tuition. I truly want to teach him a lesson. However, I'm concerned that this might have an impact on my marriage. Is there a better long-term way to deal with this bad guy? Blending families may be quite difficult. Joe's actions are unquestionably going beyond normal sibling rivalry and into the realm of bullying. If he doesn't want to apologize, think about establishing clear rules and penalties. Additionally, because family therapy seemed to have strengthened Kira and Ellie's relationship in the past, you might want to look into it once more. Regarding your marriage, it will be crucial for you and the children to come to an agreement on how to manage the circumstance. I thus kept my word. Joe's college tuition was no longer paid by me. Joe persisted with his bad behavior and denied that he had embarrassed Ely. She even gave up tennis since the shame was so severe for her. Before it's too late, I informed Kira that Joe's actions needed to be closely examined. She could do nothing, though. It got out of control at that moment. He believed it to be a fictitious threat, and I would ultimately forget it. However, I didn't. His semester fee was due soon, and I failed to pay it. I was on my property. His college sent me many emails and reminder calls, but I chose to ignore them. He then approached me the day before the due date and asked, "Dude, when are you planning to pay the tuition? Are the accountants after me?" Yes, he used exactly this phrase. I answered, "Please refrain from using this slang when speaking to me, or I will put your dumb accent up your lazy butt and refuse to continue paying your tuition until you accept responsibility for your behavior and provide an apology." I reasoned that he could wake up if he lost something little in his schooling. No. "Do you think this would make me apologize?" he replied, glaring at me. After that, he left the house. He left college the next time I heard from him. Kira was angry about the whole thing. She said that she ought to have intervened when the moment was appropriate and covered his education until the very end. She volunteered to help out when she saw that I wasn't lowering my guard, even though she had assumed I would pay for it. She was not holding a lot of cash. She needed to use down her funds. Her entitled son had already met with his academic counselor and submitted his withdrawal letter when she approached the college administration to request an extension. She accused her of not supporting him. Therefore, she declined to accept her assistance. Despite his enormous ego, he made her feel guilty for choosing us over him. He continued to lounge about my place and at my expense. Kira makes very little money. She worked 2 jobs to raise him, but before they met me, they were barely making ends meet. I urged her to relax and stop once we were married. She might choose to have one or both. Then she added another. Joe's choice upset Kira. Jill doubled down on his resistance when she tried to reason with him, begging him to apologize to Ella and return to school the next term. I dropped out, and he became worse. He didn't hunt for a job or take responsibilities. Instead, he spent his days relaxing at home, playing video games, or hanging out with pals. The fact that he didn't even look for a method to finance his own schooling astounded me. He simply resigned. It was the start of a string of poor choices on his behalf. I began to feel bitter. I had provided him with a home, an education, and every opportunity imaginable, and out of some misplaced pride, he had hurled it all the way. I eventually told Kira that Joe needed to be disciplined after weeks of seeing him do nothing. He never took his academics seriously. He was thus not very offended by the tutoring being shut off. We sat him down the next day and told him to find employment if he wasn't attending school. You can't expect us to help you when you sit around all day. Joe didn't even look at me. He was absorbed in his phone. I'm working on it, he added. I fired back. No, you're not. You're waiting for me to give you more cash as you sit here. It isn't taking place. He gave an eye roll. All right. I'm going to launch my own company. All I need is a loan. I looked at him in disbelief. Do you want me to lend you money to launch your company, after all of your actions? He gave me a rebellious look as he stared me in the eye. Yes, why not? I'd attempted to reason with him. He showed no regard for me or anybody else in this house, despite my attempts to assist him. That was the last straw. An ultimatum was in order. I informed him that he had 2 options. You may either move out or begin paying your rent and utilities. He let out a magnificent scream and left. We assumed that he could be looking for a job, but he didn't. His days went as normal. I gave him a month to pay his half and find employment. He acted as though he had endless time to clear up his trash from the past. However, nothing altered. He just nodded when I inquired if he had found employment. Not at all. Then pack and go, I urged. His expression was one of bewilderment as he gazed at me. I said, You're throwing me out. I'm offering you an option. Now you're an adult. You will not help out in this home. You can't live here then. He simply blew up. You're not my father. You have no right to dictate to me what I should do. I refuse to back down. Even though I'm not your biological father, I've been your support system. I'm finished. You either leave or you contribute. He slammed doors as he ran out of the room. After a few minutes, he gathered his belongings and departed. He didn't even bid Kira farewell. Kira was obviously devastated. She wept for days, and I tried all in my power to console her. However, I also knew that we had made the correct decision. We could not continue to condone his misbehavior. He had to learn to be responsible. Kira said something that surprised me during one of these emotional chats. I wish I had gone with him, she added. What did she mean? I asked. He's still my kid and still very young. But I know what he did was terrible, she added. How am I going to leave him? I have no idea how he's doing. I can't even get him to return my calls. I worry about his security. My heart fell. That was not what I anticipated her to say. I understood, of course. She has a child named Jill. However, I had assumed that we were all in agreement to hold him accountable. I know it's tough for her, but having him around is also a little challenging for us. Am I a jerk for disciplining him? Maybe found here. I didn't chat much for the next week after our final conversation. Karen. The home remained silent and tense. I knew she could feel the burden of her room and studies, but I made every effort to avoid it. I had reached a breaking point. I had to know Kira's position. I bluntly questioned her about her desire to leave me and go with Jill. She gave me a glance. She was weeping and her eyes were crimson. She said, "I'm not sure. Jill is my son, but I still love you. I can't leave him alone." I got my message across. You must learn to be responsible, but I'm not asking you to leave him. He will never mature if you continue to save him. Kira struggled to balance the truth of the situation with her love for Jill. She acknowledged that I was correct, but it doesn't make things any simpler for her. She has only one son, Jill, and when kids are involved, it's easy to overlook what's right and wrong. I get her point somewhat, but I'm powerless. There was no way I was going to beg Jill to return home. Perhaps we might come up with a solution if Jill returned and expressed regret for his actions. However, he is too arrogant to acknowledge his errors. A few months have passed since then. Jill eventually replied to Kira after many efforts, telling her that he was couch surfing with his pals. But he hasn't accepted his acts, so he's next down. I'm relieved that he has at least secured a part-time position. Ellie is beginning to open up once more. With him gone, she seemed more at ease. She is free to move about the house without fear of his next attack. She expressed her desire to return to her tennis school the other day. Kira and I are now working through this. I hope she will eventually realize that what I did was for Jill's benefit since I adore her. It was a brave step to stop Jill's tuition, and it seems sense that she felt compelled to hold him responsible for his behavior. Seeing Kira struggle with the consequences of her choice is devastating, especially considering her close relationship with her kid. However, it was much required. It's crucial that your discussions demonstrate your shared concern for Jill and your desire to help him grow up. Even so, it's challenging when he doesn't appear to accept the consequences of his actions. The healing is here. How would you have responded? Please let us know what you think in the comments section below. We also appreciate your presence in the R Lounge today. You ensure you don't miss the next video. Be sure you press the notification bell, like and subscribe. Till the next occasion.